Electric Cafe.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Electric Cafe. So today's video is I'm going to go over the history of the CD case and the evolution of the packaging designs that they used throughout the 80s and all the way through today to from bigger labels to smaller labels and some smaller box sets and things like that as well. And then I think the best way to do this is also on the second part of this video, whether it be at the end of this video or maybe possibly part two. I'll go through some of my favorite, most interesting package designs and CD holders and cases that I've come across in my collecting for over 40 years. You know, growing up through the 80s, you know, from like 1983 to 1992 probably, cassettes were probably the most important format for anybody who was making mixtapes and collecting different music and recording music off the internet, or not the internet, I mean off the radio, off their favorite radio stations. And if you grew up through the 80s, you know all what I'm talking about. Waiting a couple hours to hear your favorite song and then finally record it. Like that's how painstaking it was, like to listen to the radio for a couple hours, which, you know, wasn't that bad because that was kind of like listening to a mixed CD or your favorite streamer or what have you now. But, you know, like I think you loved every format, you know, and certainly there was things about every format you didn't like, whether it be, you know, the cassettes, the tape crinkling and, you know, and breaking off, or the CDs skipping or and getting marked up, or you losing them, or the vinyl getting, you know, a click on it or a scratch on it, right? Or reel to reel just breaking and the machine being, you know, out of alignment and things like that and just not working properly. So it seems like every, or even like your disc tray breaking on your early CD player, you know, or having to replace your belt on your turntable. There was so many different things that could put you off on whatever format it was. So, you know, it's funny when I see kind of newer collectors, like in the past 10 or 15 years, that have gotten into vinyl, and they're so hardcore about, I gotta get it on vinyl. Why is it so expensive? Why is it so expensive? And I'm like, why don't you just get a used CD player for $100 and go buy a CD for $15, and then you have the music, and then eventually down the road you run into a vinyl copy. Like that's how I was. It was about getting the music, and then as you get older, you can figure out what format it is. Format you'd rather have it on. And okay, I DJ this, I'd rather have it on vinyl because I like the tactile aspect of mixing on vinyl. But I certainly like the advantages of CDs. I love to record on tape, you know, whether it be reel to reel or cassette. So, you know, or even D88, which if you guys remember this, D88 cassettes were kind of more popular for professional studios. So even like things like that, or a DAT player or something like that, was some of my favorite sort of digital tape. And when you grow up, you know, through that period and all the different format changes and the industry trying to, you know, get you in a different format and buy multiple, like I was buying everything on every format. Like I would have, if I really liked it, I would have it on multiple formats. If I loved it, I would seem to have it on vinyl, CD, and cassette. Like it didn't matter to me. Like I always wanted to collect like all of them, and that's when you really start knowing that you're a collector. Is not when you nobody grows up saying I want to be a collector. Like it just happens. And I think when I first realized that I was a collector was when I started having something on vinyl for 30 years and coming across a CD. I'm like, oh, okay, well, for $4, you know, I'd love to hear it in my car because I still have a CD player in my car, so let me pick it up. You know, that's when you know you're a collector, is when you start buying things in different format. But then I think about like back in like 1988, I bought things on different formats. So in some ways, I've always been a collector. Just didn't really think of myself as a collector. As you in some ways you want to collect every version of what you like, but it was really just the different versions because it offered a lot of times just different alternative remixes or demos or 7-inch edits or radio mixes or a bonus track or something like that. So you just collect it all because there was different music on any. You didn't really collect them because you necessarily wanted to have it on every format. But I think, you know, sometimes people will like I've run into people that are just really attached to one format, and I find that like kind of sad because there's advantages and disadvantages of every format, and I really enjoy all the aspects and all the disadvantages and advantages and quirks of every format. So in this video, I'm going to go through the evolution of the CD format and the different packages and designs, and then whether it be a part 2 or at the end of this video, I'm going to show you some of my favorite designs and some of my favorite versions of certain CD designs. You know, around like 1981, they were trying to make, you know, what would be the most cost-effective, ergonomic, and best small package to accommodate a CD, but also kind of, you know, keep it small and keep it compact, you know, like the CD itself. And so they were trying to, you know, find the best option that could, house the artwork, the CD, and it be pretty affordable to mass produce. And they tried different materials, and they ended up settling on. Here's my first CD, by the way, 1986. So they settled on this type of CD case, which is still probably the most commonly used CD, strangely enough. It, you know, for the most part, probably with majors labels anyways. It has your plastic, you know, holds the CD in here. You've all seen this. You know, you can take it apart really easily and take out the back J card. Makes it really easy for mass producing, and you know, it was a fine package for the most part, easy to put together, and you know, held the CD nicely. For the most part, these didn't break, as you guys know, that hold the CD. For the most part, they did a good job, but definitely in later years, I don't know if the plastic got cheaper, and certainly when they went to the clear ones, a lot of them would break. But these early ones were had like a softness to the plastic where they bent a little bit so they could hold up to a lot of usage. But some of the later ones really had a lot of issues, and if you ever got a CD shipped to you and that was broken, you know, some of the best people that would ship CDs to you would put a little plastic thing, a little bubble square here, and that would prevent it from cracking when they would send you a CD, because a lot of times in this kind of standard packaging, you know, it would be a little bit loose in there, and it would crack the spindle. But as you can see, the big issue with these early ones were, you know, these corners breaking that had the little knob to make the fold over, you know, to open the CD. But it was nice for the most part, and strangely enough, it's still being used. And you know, it held the artwork pretty nicely. It was easy to, you know, come out, which was, you know, sometimes over time it would kind of click, you know, and prevent the information from, or the cover, you know, if you wanted to read the inside notes and stuff like that, you know, it would sort of prevent it, and over time it would be kind of annoying. You just kind of had to be a little careful with it and in how you used it. But yeah, that was my first CD back in 1986. I got my first CD player in 1987 for Christmas when I was 11, and roughly at that time they were just kind of going a little bit more portable. Before, they were kind of about the size of VCRs, if you don't know, and they got a little bit smaller, but for the most part, whether they were professional rack-mounted ones or ones for home use, they were still pretty thick. They're kind of looked about a little bit smaller than a VHS. You know, probably in between a VHS player and a DVD player. And as they got a little smaller, they got to a DVD player. But I actually got a little bit portable one, and but you didn't necessarily want to take it with you everywhere, because it wasn't one you would, you know, as they got smaller in the later 80s and early 90s, they became really more portable. And but for the early ones, you didn't really want to play it when it was on its side. It was a Sony model, and you kind of clicked the top, and it kind of opened the top. And of course, later on, they had, you know, different types of trays and stuff like that. But that early one, the top just kind of popped off, and you put the CD in. which was kind of the early style of the more portable ones. A lot of the record stores had a lot of issues with CDs being lost in bins and stuff like that. And if you guys remember, they made the long box, and that was to help it kind of sit in the record bins a lot easier, so they would stand up because the records were in there deeper and the CDs would be totally lost. So it kind of helped it stick out, and that was really nice for like packaging. And I wish I still had a lot of those long boxes. Some of them are worth a lot of money. And I had ones for like Violator, and they pretty much used the long boxes from like 1987, 1988, all the way through about 1992. And then somewhere along the lines, probably around 90 or 91, they started making the CD holders for these. As you most remember, probably from FYE and stores like that, they just made the plastic holder bigger for the CD case, and that kind of helped it sit in the bins as well, and also would be a deterrent for people if people tried to steal it, because it also had it was locked in there with a peg, with kind of a lock mechanism or some kind of metal detector to help and prevent from stealing. And so that was the strangely enough, that's been that type of CD holder has still been probably the most commonly used by major labels, strangely enough, going on 45 years now. Early on, if you wanted a double CD, they had these, and sometimes these are triples and quadruples. I remember, I think it was Led Zeppelin or maybe Eric Clapton, Crossroads had one where it was sort of 4-disc in there, but for the most part, these were either 2 CDs. Here's the early Beatles one, and they would put the artwork inside here, which made it a kind of a not a bad design. It was plastic, so it's still for the most part these spindles didn't break, but occasionally they still would. But for the most part, it was still kind of your standard double CD. And classical music used this a lot for the long players and bigger anthologies and stuff like that. Most of the companies would use this, but you can still see, as it just witnessed, they still kind of pop out. They still kind of are loose in here, for the most part. But these are pretty good, pretty good for the most part. These CD, holders for double CDs, and just a couple other ones. They were still using these through the later '90s. You can see here. I got this used sometime in the past. Smashing Pumpkins, Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness was a double one. Derek May, Innovator. So I think this one came out probably around 1999, 98, somewhere around 2000. So they were still using these through, almost to 2000, early 2000s. They were still using these. Another option that they tried was this interesting one, which was this chill out one, kind of smaller. But it kind of opened up like a regular CD, but it also opened up, the other way. So you had a CD on both sides. And this was, obviously not bad to make it a little bit smaller, but still not ideal for a 2 CD. And so for the most part, through the 90s, they went with this, one of the worst designed CD, but probably one of the most cost-effective CDs ones. If you guys remember this one had so many issues with the tray cracking and it not being able to do something as simple as this. It was just a bad design, and that's probably what really prevented this. What really pushed the CDs to go to a different type of material, because it wasn't ideal for a 2-disc set. It was break so often, and that's what kind of would give you, would let you know that it was a 2-disc set. It either would say it somewhere on the spine, or it would say up here on the marker, something like this. Here's a Ambient Systems 2, which came out in 1995. So it would say the 2 CD up there, but still, this one. These were so delicate back in the day, especially the ones that had the 2 CD on they were just so delicate, and they would often break. Here's a Digweed's Global Underground. This one was the worst. It would fold over here in the middle, and it was clean right here, in the middle. Sorry if it's, I'm kind of trying to show you, but it's kind of hard here. But I'm sure you guys remember these were some of the worst ones. The spindles would break, the tray would break. They were just so cheaply made, and this was kind of like just probably the worst designed CD case of all time, the double CD. Just really annoying, and you'd have a loose CD that would pop into here and get scratched, and it was just one of the worst designed CD holders of all time for CD. Just a mess. As the 90s kind of moved on, going a little bit towards box sets, but I don't want to pull out like big box sets, like, but just kind of the smaller designs. So you kind of had these, like, they would come out with these sleeves. This is Laurent Garnier's Laboratory Mix, kind of with the interesting hologram, which, it's kind of hard to see now, but it's kind of faded. But, you can take two CDs and then you just kind of pop it in there. And that was kind of not a bad design. Sometimes these would break, and this was going on about 30 years old, and it's still in pretty good shape. But you just kind of pushed it in there, and that was that was a better option than going the double CD route, even though it was probably a little bit more expensive to make because you had to make the cardboard insert, the package here, but instead you basically could have two sets of liner notes, one for each CD, versus the 2-disc set. You only had a slot for one of them. So that was a nicer option, I thought. And then another option was sort of going with the sleeve still, but the sleeve was open in the middle. This is Paul Van Dyke's triple disc. And this one, again, there's always a CD, coming out of it as soon as you open these things. But it wasn't the best holder. This one was a little more rigid plastic. The top would open up, and sometimes it was hard to get, but then you'd have the artwork, inside, and you can see it's a little bit, from a little bit damaged from just moving the CD around. But, kind of a 2-disc set or a 3-disc set. This one was 3-disc set, and it kind of went inside here. So, not a bad option, but it's still not really ideal. But, it was just, CD is kind of evolving, And then you had something like this, which was kind of a little bit better. This was a Third World's box set. Does a lot of reggae. So inside you had a 2-disc or 3-disc set. I think this one was 2-disc, yeah. And then inside you would pull out the artwork, which was really nice. So the artwork would stay nice and compact and clean, and it would just kind of slide in between, the CDs really nicely. And then you still had a nice side, that you could tell what it is, which was really important when you're looking for CDs. I mean, of course, anything with the CD, you're gonna be able to see. You're gonna see that, but you're gonna see this a little bit better and read that a little bit better than this one. So that was a nice option of still having the back, but making it big enough for a bigger booklet inside, which was really cool. So the box sets were getting a little bit more elaborate. This one wasn't bad, still kind of that same thing with the artwork inside, but at least this plastic was a little bit different. I'm not really up on the plastic differences, but this one was a little bit softer plastic, I felt like, and just a little bit more a better made CD case, in this one. But it's very similar to the other one. But it was nice because you could still see the bigger, again, bigger spine, and it allowed for a bigger booklet to fit nicely in there. And that was a nice way to just kind of take out the artwork and be able to see it and read it when you're listening along. So that was a better option, I thought. Another option was just making all different CDs inside a booklet. This one's Todd Terry's anthology. So Todd Terry did a lot of great techno and house in the middle to late 80s and 90s. This one was a 3-disc set, and then you had the booklet, which was very similar to that. And still, this was not a bad package. A little cardboard thing. Very similar to the first one I was showing you, the Lauren Garnier one. But then you had three kind of set CDs, and these were kind of the thinner one, which I'll kind of touch on in a little bit here when I go back to the singles. But that was another option, which is not a bad option as well. Just anything was better than those spindles that kind of moved over. That was better, and these were cleaner too. And just again, just to slide in the artwork was so nice versus putting it inside the CD. Just very nice, clean package, and they used these a lot during the middle to even early 2000s. They were still using these, and probably even to the late 90s until they went with the fold out, and they really embraced the cardboard option, which is I'll show you quite a bit, because that probably had the most options. It was the cardboard ones. And then later on, also then you got to a little bit bigger sets. So this was a 6-disc set of space and bass. So you had a lot of techno and ambient on here, a lot of psychedelic. And you can see here, all 6 discs would fit in here. And each one was a normal CD with the artwork on it, just different colors. Different colors. And that kind of fit in this bigger package, and these were kind of popular through the middle. Probably these ones actually, I've seen these probably a lot in the probably around like 1989, somewhere around through the middle, late 90s. A lot of the box sets came in these, and probably even into the early kind of TV DVDs. Box sets and TV shows sort of used these, and so yeah, that was kind of a bigger option for box sets. One of the biggest reasons for the changes in the styles of the CD cases, besides the box set, were the singles. As the middle 80s came, the 12-inch single really started to sell really well. People wanted alternate versions, and DJs wanted extended remixes, and there was demo versions and B-sides and extra B-sides on the 12-inch. So the 12-inch really started to sell well. And not far behind was the CD single. So there's probably no other case option that really propelled the differences and the different cases that would come out, and the evolution of the cases more so than the CD single. They first started out as just cardboard, just very simple cardboards with 3 tracks on there for the most part. This is the early Pet Shop Boys Jealousy one. Well, that's 1991. They also had Rent, 1988. Left to My Own Devices. Actually, Rent was 87. Left to My Own Devices was 88. But these are, obviously imports. You can see made in Germany. These were early imports. And, some of the, as soon as you saw like the different kinds of cases when you were in the CDs, when you were in the stores and you saw any kind of like unique new case, you knew it was an import, and you knew it was probably going to be expensive. Even though these were like 3-disc, 3-song tracks, CDs, they were still pushing, $20, $30 at the time just for a 3-disc CD. And I saw some even upwards of, just ridiculous prices. And you think of like the import VHSs and just some, they were really it seemed like the stores were really taking advantage of the imports for a while there, because just the prices for import CD, anything that said import on it, it was just ridiculous. But these are some of the early CD singles, before they really went to the maxi singles, and just kind of putting a little cardboard on there. And strangely enough, a lot of the industry and a lot of the labels would go back to these, because these were some of the most simplest and ergonomic and probably cost-effective type of CD holders. And then, it was still being used as much into the middle 90s. Here's Walking in My Shoes, just the CD single again. High by The Cure. Just very simple designs for CD singles. Just a little cardboard slot, and you would just pull out the CD, out of the top. This one kind of had more of a felt, double-sided, so you couldn't see the CD. And then some of them didn't even have one. You would just pull out the CD out of it, and that was for the most part. That's that's how they were. That's how the old ones were, I believe, as well. Yeah, just pull them out, and no case, no sleeve inside, just a cardboard case. And then sometimes around like 1989, 88, I started to see these. Here's Nine Inch Nails Sin. These ones were a little bit thin, and they used these a lot, through the middle 80s, or late 80s and early 90s. And actually probably into I'm trying to think of like early 2000s as well, for dance music. A lot of them use this as well. And this is kind of one of the early styles of the maxi single for CDs. Another one is Front 242s. One of the first ones I ever bought. This one was You Men. Had 4 tracks on here, not necessarily in a super extended maxi single, but it was bigger than 1 or 2 songs, which some of the singles had. There was actually some singles that had less than 10 minutes on it. And that's kind of what propelled the industry to try to 3-inch and 5-inch CDs as well. But not a bad design overall. These didn't break, but no, I don't think anybody was necessarily a huge fan of these sort of J cards that were really small. They didn't really say much on the side, but they were kind of, if you can see the side, they weren't, they weren't the best, but they didn't really, these didn't break or cause any issues, but they weren't the nicest designs, I think, but not bad. Another one was, Depeche Mode used these on their 6-disc box sets in 1991, for the first 6 box sets they ever put out. And again, these were not bad, but not great. It didn't really allow a booklet to go in there. That was really nice, and it held the CD pretty well. But a lot of times these would crack, which you can see on mine. They weren't necessarily the most sturdiest ones, so there were a lot of times these would crack, but for the most part the edges stayed on, which was better than a lot of the standard CDs, because these hinges were one of the better hinges, for single CDs anyways. And then around 1990, one of the best CD cases come out, in my opinion. And it was just the single format with the cardboard, fold out. Or door, I should say. Just one door. Didn't have any room for any liner notes, unfortunately, although later on they would some of them would cut a little hole, a slot, and you could pull out a small booklet in it. But for the most part, this was very simple, very clean. As long as they glued on these pretty well, and that was a issue with some of them, and probably the reason why they went away from this is that some of the glue would get old, and this plastic would come off the cardboard fairly easily, and especially when they changed from this harder, thicker plastic, and they went to the more see-through ones. Once they went to the plastic see-through ones, those are the ones that really had issues sticking to this, because of the type of material it was. Like when you put on the regular plastic and glue, eventually that's going to come off. This one had sort of like a different material. It was still plastic, but it was a little bit harder than the more tinier plastic. But this was a very strong CD case that a lot of people used. And for these singles and maxi singles, you didn't need a lot of information. You weren't necessarily bummed that you didn't get a liner note. It still had a cool picture on the internet inside, and it was kind of a neat package. It was one of my favorites. This one's obviously London Beats. I've Been Thinking About You from 1990. Just another one while I had it out. Here's INXS's Suicide Blonde. Same type thing. Just kind of a nice, package. Very clean. And it still had a nice, a spine, so you could easily see it when it's in your CD bin. You know what I mean? It wasn't like those singles I was showing you, the no spines. You just couldn't. They get lost in the bins, and these were a little bit bigger. Also, the smaller ones that I was showing you, Um, these ones necessarily didn't have a great spine too. You just kind of knew if you saw them in your CD bin, you're like, oh, that's probably a single. But you had to pull it out and check each one. Like you couldn't see it from the spine. These ones kind of solved a lot of issues, but you didn't have liner notes. Like it was probably easier to cost effective to manufacture. It held the CD nicely. The spindle was about as good as you can get. Over time, you kind of the sides would fray a little bit, but overall, one of my favorite packages of CDs of all time. Here's another one, Susie and the Banshees. Kiss Them For Me. Nice packaging, right? Just nice and clean cardboard. Cool picture inside. I was so happy when these came out. I just, they sit nice in your bin. You could. Excuse me, you could get them easily. They didn't break. No moving plastic parts. Here's another one, fixed. 9 Inch Nails. Just really nice design. Later on, they started getting a little bit more elaborate with them, making them like a double. Some of them would hold a booklet inside. This one's Shadow Time by Susie and the Banshees. So they started becoming a little bit more elaborate, and this would lead to them being used for albums. This was 1991, so they got it a little bit bigger in here, and then they started figuring they could put the liner notes inside, and then eventually double CDs. So this was the smart way to go, I felt like, and again, still sit nicely in your CD package. I mean, in your CD bins, and just very nice, clean, right? This was and then, to carry on from that, people started using them for albums. This is an ambient album, and I think this came out in 2002. Just wanted to show this one. You had the CD over here, and then the booklet. You could pull the booklet out. You had the nice booklet inside. This was like a 6-page booklet. Still got some artwork in behind it, but this is Irigo Sounds label, which released Biosphere, if you know Biosphere, and but yeah, they did a lot of ambient stuff. This was Living Dreamtime, Exploring the Water Element. Really good ambient album, by the way, but just a nice package, nice and clean. Also, it's they went away. This one kind of evolved from the nicer picture to even a nicer kind of glossy. So just a really nice packaging there, and that was as late as 2002. And then just another one while I have it, here's Plastic Man's. So this is like 1993 or 1994. Actually, probably 95 or 96 when Artifacts came out. But again, kind of a fold out with the CD in the middle. You got the information here, the track listing here. So you didn't necessarily have to have a booklet to really tell all about the CD in here. And you still got a nice, clean package. It also was nice and light. But you can still see, if you can kind of see there on the edge there, still kind of coming away from the CD. This one, still a nice material, but this one's a little bit more, a little bit, almost more styrofoam almost. This one seems a little bit lighter than the earlier plastic design, but still an overall a nice package, I felt like. Just really enjoyed the cardboard ones. And then, another one with the information all over on the side here, and then you could have a nice room to kind of put some information in here and some nice packaging. So this was Tom Middleton's album, Life Tracks. From Tom Middleton was in Global Communication, most known for that, but a great DJ as well. And this was on 6 Degrees Records. So nice packaging here. This one's even more cleaner, but you can still see it's kind of pulling up from the CD a little bit. Still kind of as they went to the clear ones. But this one is a really nice feel to it as well. They went to a kind of a nicer plastic, but again, still a little bit, coming off the CD. There was really no way to fix that, and that was probably the end of this type of format, because when you pulled it off and then you either had to just hold it in there or put another plastic holder around it, like a plastic sleeve, or just Otherwise you had these just kind of glue marks on both sides, and that wasn't really very attractive either if that happened to you. But still a nice package overall. Another one similar to that. Again, CD on one side, information on the double other. Also, you still had room for liner notes, but this one didn't necessarily have that. But this is the ambient album, Horizons 222, the Three Swans, early ambient and trance. Other option there, and that really kind of, still kept on going through the late '90s. This type of package, a little bit different material in here, almost like a recycled cardboard on this one. Not as nice as the earlier ones that the more popular labels would use, but still, kind of a cool effect, kind of like almost like a newspaper cardboard. You can almost tell from the colors of it. But this was Herbert and his, I think it was on Phono Records. Some minimal techno and minimal house in here. The great Matthew Herbert. And then they kind of evolved a little bit and got a little bit more clean looking. Like this one's Thomas Brinkman and his Rosa CD. Just really nice and clean. They became a nice clean package. And this one's actually pulling up the cardboard more so than it adhered so much to this one. I guess on this one they sort of put a little cardboard in between. So there's actually a separate cardboard, and then the actual whole sleeve. So they glued it to the sleeve, and the sleeve is coming up where the I don't know if you can see that, but you can see the cardboard underneath. The white cardboard there is still kind of pulling up from the CD away from the from the original, or the bigger sleeve, I suppose. But still a nice design overall. And then that's what led to bigger bands starting to do it, and that kind of led to the Amazing Mezzanine by a Massive Attack, and that one where you could pull out the CD out of the side, which was nice, and then you could also pull out the artwork, in it as well. So that was a nice design. So another really cool CD case that kind of came out of the singles era was these ones, and they sort of had like a door on them. So they were similar to the cardboard ones with just the edge, but it didn't really have any liner notes for the most part, but just had a really nice kind of, I don't know if you can see that, but just kind of a little door, that would hold the CD and it would snap in place. So that was a really cool one, that I thought probably should have stayed around a little bit longer than it did. I only saw this for a couple years, and from like 1993, maybe 94 to like 96, I saw that. But really a cool kind of, option. The CD wouldn't fall out if you had a little lock on it, and that was nice. Still had kind of the same similar back, but it also added, the case around the side, which protected it a little bit better, and on the sides, on the corners. All the corners were protected nicely. So it was a cardboard version with a plastic side and a door. Really cool. I'm not sure why this didn't stick around more. The only thing I can think of is they wanted to go thinner. But here, you can still see it on the side here, still nice in your bins, and they had a nice door on it. Very cool. Moby used these quite a bit, in his early days. These are, Feeling So Real, Bring Back the Happiness, Every Time You Touch Me. He used these from 93 to 94 for all his singles. So these were really great. And then also to put it in a different color to match was kind of cool. I'm sure they probably could have done even other colors of this besides black and white. That could have been really cool. But just a really nice design. I really love these. Also, Aphex Twins used this. It was really cool. Nice, very cool. The Cure used these in 96 with their singles. Mint Car in the 17th. Really cool. Very nice designs. Very ergonomic. Probably fairly inexpensive to use. I mean, really no moving parts on here. It's kind of like just a perforated plastic piece that just kind of folds. You know, it just happens to snap in place. Really cool design. Later on, you know, just on a side note, New Electronic would use that for their a similar design for their CDs. If you guys know this great Netherlands techno label, these compilations are just amazing. If you like ambient techno, these are amazing. But what these did was it just used a little bit smaller one, and it was just kind of a little snap. How about that? Isn't that cute? No, seriously though, they were really cool. And then it would fold out. You know, nice CD design there. Nice CD, just very kind of cool. Just kind of snaps in place there. So then, if you didn't have, you know, CDs that were folding out, you had CDs that would pull out, right? And then you had a lot of those, a lot of different ones made in cardboard, really. This was Plaid's Trainer. Very interesting case. You kind of open up the top, and then out comes out the CDs, you know, and the booklet. Just kind of an interesting package there. Here's another one in there as well. You know. So just all three of these kind of come in that little pouch there. So you just kind of slide them in there. Sorry if this isn't best view for these, but very cool. You know, just kind of slides in there, and then you have a little door there. And that's a nice little package for Plaid's Trainer. That was a cool design. Another one similar to that. This one's Ultramarine User's Guide. Kind of similar. This one was only a smaller CD. This isn't necessarily a double CD, if I'm not mistaken. But inside, you pull it out, and then you have your standard sleeve in here. And that would be a nice way to take care of it, and then it still be in this design. Not very, you know, probably not very cost effective, but you know, still cardboard, so I can't imagine how expensive it is. But then you just slide it back in there, and that was it. So not a bad design on that one. And then you had Din Records, which was a techno and IDM label. Aravane was on there, and Monolake and Dynamo and stuff like that. And these were kind of nice because they just kind of pulled out. Just kind of nice jackets. Inside, one sleeve in there. You know, nice and thin still, but not the best for seeing it, you know, in a CD bin. You know, it's trying to find it so you could play it, but still a nice design, you know. Here's another one they did. You know, another Aravane and Dynamo one. Just very, very, very clean presentation on those. You know, really like those. Those are one of the better ones, I feel like, as far as like the pull-out ones. You just, you know, it's a little bit more robust than just pulling out the CD out of a side sleeve, and it has a one inside of it to kind of, you know, keep it solid and keep it a little bit thicker than the CD, still kind of protecting it. Kind of nice design there. This one kind of took it to a little bit more of an extreme. This one had a one door, and then you would pull out the information and CD, you know, out of it. This was kind of a fold out here. Or I'm sorry, this is actually just a sleeve as well. But they actually, you know, put a little design on there, so that was cool. You know, and that just goes right inside there, so that was nice too, but this one's a little thicker, you know, and then just folds over nicely. This is Phonem's. If you guys know the IDM artist Phonem, that's his, I think this came out in 2001, I think, from More Records. Also, another option, John Mouse, one of his albums. Nice package, just kind of slides in and out. Another option of that. Very cool. Kind of similar to that Din one. Another one here. And here they're starting, this one's a little bit newer. This one's this one's Biosphere. This Biosphere, I think, came out in like 2020 or 2021. So this one's a little bit newer. So they, you know, put the information on the back there and gave it a little bit more design into the, you know, into the cardboard. Nice design though. You know, solid, solid. You know, still bows out a little bit though. Still kind of bows out a little bit. You know, but not bad. Wax Doctor, which is Matthew Herbert. Kind of another option. This one has a little bit more inside. So you pull it out, it's got a sleeve inside, and then you got a nice booklet inside. You know, I'm trying not to drop it because there's something else in here. Another inner, looks like a mailer. This one was on RNS Records. RNS did a couple of these, some kind of box sets or boxes that hold a single CD in here, and then the CD goes in there. So that wasn't bad, you know. But it kind of gets too, you know, because it sticks out a little bit, it just gets kind of frayed too much in the corners. And you can see this one's kind of beat up. This one's also on RNS. Same type thing, a booklet inside, CD, and a sort of a record label pamphlet. You know, just a little bit bigger than the CD. Not a bad design, but, you know, not bad, but could have been better. Nice clean design, kind of a smaller one. Inner Creeps by Massive Attack. This is the single. And this was kind of, seems like one they're still kind of sticking with. You know, just kind of again, just a holder inside that has a design or information on it. You know, and then you can just slide it into the small box. You know, generally, if you do it in a color like this, it's easier to find in your bin. Another one of those RNS records, you know, inside here with the fold out. This was kind of a unique one by Actress, the electronic artist. So this one kind of had like a picture inside. So it was kind of your, you know, I'll show you a few of these. I have a lot of different ones of these styles. But here, when you just open up the CD, folds out, and then you put it inside. And you can slide it in either way, but it just kind of goes into like a kind of a frame, which is kind of cool. That one's kind of unique. Pretty cool. Kind of more of a hand design, which is pretty cool considering Actress probably, you know, was a bigger electronic artist. Probably sold like, I don't know, maybe 3,000 or 5,000 copies of this CD, maybe a little bit more. And to have, you know, kind of a unique design like that is pretty cool for a smaller, for a smaller artist anyway, smaller label. So this was a Ninja Tune compilation, which I have this on vinyl as well. It's four disc vinyl. I believe it's 2 CDs, but kind of interesting. It opens up a double, and then it pulls out of the top, you know, the 2 CDs. So kind of another interesting one. One that's probably the only one I've ever seen of this one that has 2 CDs come out of the top with the information inside. Kind of interesting. This is an interesting one from the Star Seeds, an older kind of retrospect that collects 2 of their first 2 albums. And this one has like a door on it. You know, I'm trying to, so you just kind of open it up and then the CD actually comes out, which isn't great because you feel like I could go like this, which is I guess the best way to do it. And then it's a standard, you know, standard 2 CD in there. And this is the other thing, is this is one of the other issues of these double CDs, when the ones where you got to open and the CDs in there, these would always break too, these spindles. And it seemed like always the spindles in these wouldn't hold the CDs and these would break. But these ones, they did adjust this one a little bit better, this European one. Instead of having the multiple, you know, things that hold the spindle on, this was a little bit bigger. I don't know if you can see that, but a little bit different CD holder than the earlier one. So this one was a little bit better, but still, you don't necessarily want to turn the CD upside down to, you know, for it to fall in and get loose in there. But interesting package overall. Then you got the booklet in here like normal, but you know, interesting package to kind of do that and then put it in this kind of, you know, kind of holder in here and just kind of slide it in here. You know, interesting. Another kind of unique one was LTJ Buchan's Logical Progression. I think it was a double CD compilation. And this one was interesting because it just it's kind of like it slides out like a normal, like a little holder, but inside, then you have a kind of a two-disc set, but with the material inside, and then you have a CD, the liner notes inside like a book. So just kind of unique to put this, which is already kind of looks like a CD, and then just put it inside of another holder, which was interesting, So it doesn't fit in there the best, but just kind of slides. But this door in the back is kind of, you can see it already like ripped, but then it slides, and then you kind of slide inside. It's kind of like a nice design, probably when they first, used it, but I've never seen anything like it since. It's very unique, to have a booklet feel to fold inside of a sleeve to put it inside to is kind of overkill, but, not bad. Just probably too many moving parts for just a double CD. Here's an interesting one by the Pet Shop Boys. Pet Shop Boys did this, kind of pull the CD out, and this is kind of like the singles I was showing you earlier, except for the booklet is kind of glued to that sleeve, which is interesting. So it's almost like, very interesting. Fold it over in there, and you got kind of like looks kind of like a book feel, and then you have a sleeve that has a hole in it to make it look like it's 3D, and it kind of slides in there. Interesting, not bad. But as the 90s progressed, you had more labels putting more media on the CDs that they were selling, whether it be enhanced audio CDs or ones that had video content or something you could download, like some pictures. And I thought that was a really exciting time for CDs from like 1997. I think I saw the first one up to about 2002. But as the internet got faster and they came out with different applications to send media, and people would have their own websites and stuff like that, or other places to download things, they sort of hosted them there. But I really liked the idea of additional content on the CD if you purchased it, and hopefully that's something that gets more traction as CDs continue to, I think for the most part it continues. CDs are coming back in a lot of ways, especially in a lot of genres, and I think in some genres I think it's been back for a while. But to go along with that, you had cases that would coordinate with kind of differentiate themselves in the marketplace when you saw them, and some of them would be kind of unique cases, like this Depeche Mode Home / Useless enhanced CD, and you kind of had like a kind of a pull-out tray on it, and it had extra material in it if you put it on your computer, enhanced audio. So that was kind of a cool CD case. Another one was this Pet Shop Boys Before from 1997. Strangely enough, same year. So enhanced CDs must have kind of were a thing probably not very long, sometime around 97, 98. This one also had kind of a pull-out tray, and this was almost like a light plastic. Almost feels like styrofoam, and then just a sleeve on here. Very basic. This is only a CD single as well. I think it just had one video on it, and it was enhanced CD. I can't remember. I'll have to look more into the enhanced CDs. I only have a couple enhanced CDs, but the cases were interesting to try to mark that they were different or more expensive. It was trying to get customers to buy these and to pay more money for just a very little information, because it was sort of enhanced, or maybe it had a video on it. But just wanted to show you the cases while I had them out. Also, another option with the cardboard is sort of going to some box sets and collections. This one was interesting. This one's a little bit newer. I can't remember what year this came out, but it held all 3 Sisters of Mercy albums inside. And very ergonomic, very, very cool. very inexpensive, which was great. I mean, it wasn't, the best, most attractive, case, but these were really cool in different colors. Very, very cool to have. And the price point was great for these. I think I got all three albums for like $28 or something like that in these. And I already had these, but, they were kind of scratched up, my original copies, but it was really nice to get kind of a sort of a box set in cardboard. Just a really nice. And I think there's some other ones that, there's some other artists that use these as well. I think maybe Love and Rockets did theirs on this, and just a nice option for box sets and anthologies, not to be so big and cumbersome, and just kind of nice and concise, and just some cardboard, covers for the CDs. Kind of a cool option. Also, this is another really cool box, Space Echo, which was kind of a collection of kind of spacey African music. This came out in like 2016, I think. It's a one disc set, but it kind of looks like a double set because there's a lot of information. The booklet is quite extensive on here, probably close to 60 pages on here. Really thick booklet, telling you a lot about the information in the background of the tracks and who collected them. But then inside, you have a normal CD. Just with the inside, nice artwork, really cool. Just kind of a nice design there. So just a basic CD inside of a cardboard sleeve. Has a back on it as well, so you can slide it in, and then you got a holder for a bigger booklet. So that's kind of cool. That kind of sticks out in your. Then you have another one where really cool, where it's looks like a double disc or kind of a special packaging, and still the CD is actually thinner, like the early Nine Inch Nails singles, Sin and Head Like a Hole, but this is the full album. And then inside you have a nice pamphlet of all the original, artwork and everything on all the words and stuff like that. So just kind of a nice package option. I'm not sure if this was the original CD, how the original CD came. I think this is a later copy. Funny enough, my original Downward Spirals that I had was a cassette, and that's the way I enjoyed it for most of the 90s. And then I saw this probably sometime in, I don't know, 2008 or 2010, and I bought this. So I'm not sure if this was original way it came or this was a later reissue, but really nice design on this overall. Just really clean for a CD. One of my favorite packages for a CD. Just nice and clean. And this cardboard is really strong too. Can take a beating and still really look nice and clean. Just a really excellent, sorry, it's upside down. Really nice, excellent package on this Nine Inch Nails Downward Spiral. Very cool. This one's another interesting one. You kind of just have the CD slides out, and the packaging is a little bit thinner on this one. This is Peter Dundov's Escapements. I think this came out about 2016 or 2014, somewhere on there. And just a very clear, no artwork at all in this. Just clean CD. And I always like this because it, as much as I like liner notes, if you know the artist and the material does the talking, don't need any liner notes, don't need any additional information. Also, similar to that, here's an old GPR compilation from 1994 called Digital Millennium. This is a double disc CD inside of a sleeve. Very cool design, for a double CD. Fortunately, still one of those fold over CDs, but nice packaging overall.